r/ask Reddit. What are some ridiculous history facts? Ancient Romans would put sandals on the hands of sleeping people, then tickle their face so they would slap themselves. When the Romans laid siege to Themyscira, a real place weirdly enough, they attempted to tunnel into the city. The Themyscirans released bears into the tunnels. Thus tunnel bear was invented. Claudius Drusus died in AD 20 from asphyxiation when he tossed a pear in the air and caught it in his mouth. The pear tree was put on trial, found guilty of murder, and destroyed. Two important questions. How large was this man's throat? How small was this pear? It might not be true. Suetonius tells us this story and he lived more than 50 years after Claudius Drusus died. It's also totally possible that he was actually murdered by a man named Sejanus, who was a pretty notorious figure in the early empire. We will probably never know what really happened to him. A lot of high profile deaths surrounding the royal family, for lack of a better term, from around this time that have wacky stories behind them, or at least there are suspicions, and there were suspicions at the time that their deaths weren't entirely natural. Heirs to the throne under Augustus and Tiberius had a habit of dying young. In ancient Egypt, servants were smeared with honey to attract flies away from the pharaoh. That's so dumb. Why not just put the honey on a statue or something? I mean, you'd still need servants to carry the statue around, so just skip the middleman. I'm imagining this was for when they were out and about. The first bomb dropped on Berlin by the British during World War II claimed no human casualties, but it did kill an elephant. Never forget. The Battle of Bull Run, during the American Civil War, was called the Picnic Battle, because so many civilians from Washington went on picnics on the sidelines and watched. But once the battle actually started, and the Union started to get its ass kicked, they all ran away, running over injured soldiers and dead bodies and generally disrupting the battle. This was actually a relatively common thing during the Civil War. I know it happened at Gettysburg too. Ducking tourist. War tourism is big business. It also happened at the Battle of Watling Street in the year 61. The Iceni were so confident they would defeat the Romans. They gathered round in their wagons to watch. When they were routed and had to fall back, the wagons blocked their path, and that's how Boudicca was defeated. I thought the wagon thing was pretty standard for Celtic migratory war parties. Families stand behind the line so that the warriors know retreat isn't an option. A Chinese emperor escaped an assassin by running around a pillar. After 2 hours, the assassin got bored and went home, and wasn't charged for his crimes. At US President Andrew Jackson's funeral in 1845, his pet parrot had to be removed because it was swearing. Colombia has a period in history literally called the dumb homeland period because of how incredibly dumb politicians acted at the time. How long ago? 180 years more or less, but yes, some say it never stopped. Montenegro technically was in war with Japan for 101 years and they signed a peace treaty in 2006. Montenegro was allied with Russia in Russo-Japanese War and they declared war on Japan, but they forgot to peace. When the Netherlands was occupied by Nazis in 1940, many people fled to Canada, including Princess Juliana of the Netherlands and her husband Prince Bernhard of Lippe-Biesterfeld. Their daughter, Princess Margriet, was born in Ottawa, not knowing if the baby would be male, and hence the heir to the throne. Canada declared the maternity ward of the Ottawa Hospital extraterritorial, which means it became international territory. This meant that the baby would derive its nationality only from its mother, making it 100% Dutch. I'm writing a paper on this for uni right now. The Dutch still send thousands of tulip bulbs to Ottawa as a thank you every year, and as a result Ottawa has its own tulip festival. The shortest war occurred between Zanzibar and the British Empire, lasting around 45 minutes. Both the British and the Zanzibar Sultanate fielded a couple thousand men with a few boats. However, the war ended with a single Brit wounded. Meanwhile, the Zanzibarians suffered 500 dead or wounded, including civilians, and their entire navy, a yacht, 2 boats and a shore battery gone. What? That is some serious superior firepower there. Basically, the British had multiple ironclad gunships with heavy, for 1,896, artillery and just bombarded the Sultan's building and the Zanzibar Navy for 38 minutes. There used to be bread stamps, burned into a cooked loaf of bread to avoid bread fraud, as the government supplied the wheat flour. But some bakers tried to use sawdust and other ingredients in the bread to make the wheat last longer. The bread stamps were baker specific, so they could track down where any tainted bread came from. If they were caught, they had to move to another town to make bread, or wait 3 years to continue making bread if I remember correctly. Bread laws were huge throughout most of history. Nowadays, the idea of the government so strictly regulating an industry that they are forced to sell at a certain price seems odd. But in a time when food shortages were always a danger and food reserves were slim, bread becomes a very important commodity. It's how the Roman emperors kept Rome quiet despite the fact it was such an absurdly huge city. Literally bread and circuses. Free bread, free water, and free entertainment. During the most critical portion of World War II, the Japanese thought they had sunk or disabled 3 American carriers when, in reality, they had only bombed the USS Yorktown 3 times. They were caught with their pants down when the bombs started landing at Midway. As St. Lawrence was roasted to death on a gridiron, he is said to have remarked to his torturers, "I am cooked on this side, turn me over." St. Lawrence is the patron saint of cooks and comedians. During World War II, a bunch of German soldiers got separated in rural Russia. They were trudging through snow with no food or water for days before finally finding a supply drop that missed its mark. They opened it up and found only black pepper and condoms in it. For anyone wondering, my source for this is Storm of War by Andrew Roberts. Unfortunately, I can't remember the page number because I read the book a few years ago, but I believe the chapter is called Clash of the Titans. I'm sorry I don't have a more exact source, but I'm a random commenter, not a history teacher. Welp, the pepper will temporarily make us feel warm. And as for the condoms, when in Rome, using the condoms will also make us feel warm. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died on the same day, the 4th of July, 1826, the 50th anniversary of them both signing the Declaration of Independence. Adams's last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives. He was wrong by about 5 hours." General Omar Bradley was stopped by MP during the Battle of the Bulge in World War II due to them thinking he was a Nazi infiltrator. The irony was that he was stopped because he correctly identified the capital of Illinois as Springfield when the officer thought it was Chicago. I've met plenty of people who thought Chicago was the capital of Illinois just because it's our most populated city. The longest ever US presidential inauguration speech was made by William Henry Harrison on the 4th of March, 1841. The day had terrible weather, yet Harrison chose to deliver his speech nonetheless, running 8,445 words. In fact, the speech was so long, and the weather so terrible, that Harrison caught pneumonia and died on the 4th of April, making him the shortest reigning US president ever. And his relatives are pawn shop owners on the History Channel. During the Cold War, there was an idea to drop XL condoms labeled medium onto the Soviets to make them think we were anatomically superior and be more afraid of fighting us. Easily my favorite part of American history. Whoops, I dropped my monster condom for my magnum dong. Ancient Greek and Roman marble statues were actually originally painted and were colorful. A lot of the statues' paint faded away and went away over time. Some people cleaned off the paint thinking it was debris or dirt, and other people just plain cleaned and removed all of the paint off of them because they preferred the look of white marble. Rome was actually a very colorful city and it wasn't all made of just boring plain white marble. I'm taking a course in classical archaeology and it's almost painful to sit through my professor discuss what the early archaeologists did. How about that paleontologist who blew up an entire dig site just to prevent his rival from excavating it? You talking about the dinosaur bone wars? I listened to a podcast about that pretty wild story. It is told, by Herodotus, that when Xerxes invaded Greece he had to build pontoon bridges, which were destroyed by a storm before completion. Xerxes was so upset at what happened that he had every engineer beheaded and sent soldiers down to whip the sea 300 times for its failure to obey him and comply with his plans. I think Dan Carlin talks about this on Hardcore History. If I remember correctly, they branded it with hot irons and threw shackles into it as well. Supposedly they also shit-talked the water, calling it briner and turbid while they beat it. Herostratus is the guy who burned down the temple of Artemis. The only reason he did it was to have his name written down in history. A law was also passed that made it illegal to write down his name for just that reason. Obviously, it is not enforced in modern times. That's where you're wrong, bucko. You're going to jail. Canada and Denmark have been playfully fighting for control of a tiny island near Greenland called Hans Island for decades. When the Danish visit, they leave a bottle of Danish schnapps liquor. When the Canadians visit, they take the schnapps and leave a bottle of Canadian Club whiskey and a sign that says "Welcome to Canada." I always wondered what the countries would do if someone ventured out there on their own, set up a tent, planted their own flag, and just said "This is mine now," with the other country's bottle of booze empty and thrown off to the side. Abraham Lincoln's son Robert Todd Lincoln was present at 3 different presidential assassinations. After McKinley, he decided not to accept any more invitations. Also, Robert Lincoln's life was saved by John Wilkes Booth's brother, Edwin, a famous actor, who pulled him out from a train that was about to drag him under its wheels. Stalin used to take people on the side to have some drinks with them or invite them to join him for a vacation in his holiday home. Khrushchev wrote about how much he hated those drinking breaks and vacations. Of course, Stalin would try to get you drunk and get info from you, and could decide he wants to kill you during the vacation, but you can't really decline his invitation. Khrushchev would also try to subtly get Stalin drunk as well and get info from him. One time during a vacation with Stalin asked him to dance a Ukrainian folk dance in front of a bunch of people. Khrushchev hated dancing, but he had to do it. Before Abraham Lincoln became a politician, he was a champion wrestler, with more than 300 bouts under his belt. Lincoln only lost 1 match in his career and was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in 1992. He also jumped out of a window in order to prevent a quorum. Defenestrated himself. The Massachusetts colony banned celebrating Christmas. During that time period, many people used it as an excuse to get hammered and party. Another tradition was that the young adults would cross-dress then go door to door singing songs and demanding food. This clearly doesn't fit with Puritan lifestyle, so the governor banned public celebrations. People could still celebrate it in their homes if they didn't get too rowdy. I think it was unbanned when Massachusetts became a state, but didn't become mainstream until Christmas became a national holiday. Nashville briefly legalized prostitution during the Civil War. Union soldiers stationed there kept getting syphilis, so the no prostitutes were put on a large barge in the river. I'm a little fuzzy on what happened after that, but no, it didn't work very well. So it was legalized and prostitutes had to be registered or get a license. I can't remember which, and were required to have STD checks. This lowered the amount of prostitutes with syphilis because it was getting caught and treated. That lowered the amount of soldiers getting syphilis and made the army happy. It was outlawed shortly after the war ended though. I love how they stumble onto one of the biggest bonuses of legal prostitution but then just revert right back to the previous system even though they knew it didn't work. During the Viking era, there was a leader named Sigurd. He allied with a Viking warlord named Thorstein. He wanted to conquer more land and expand his territory. He had already been very successful in doing so. This was until he feuded with another leader called Marl Bucktoothed or Marl Tusk. As his front 2 teeth were abnormally large and buck-toothed, they decided to settle their matters on the battlefield and both agreed on bringing 40 men each for the battle. However, Sigurd ignored the terms and brought 80 men. Bucktoothed had realized he had been betrayed but did not give up. They killed a number of Sigurd's men, but alas, they were overpowered and were all killed. Here's the catch. After the battle, Sigurd ordered his men to behead all the enemies and tie them to their saddles as trophies. However, as Sigurd rode home in victory, the severed head of Bucktoothed pierced his leg, which led to an infection, killing him soon after. The British once sent a guide to China as a spy so he would uncover the secrets of making tea. The British did as they pleased back in the day. Potatoes were not very popular as a food in France, like they were seen as fit only for animals. Not only that, but they were considered generally not digestible by humans. So a pharmacist named Parmentier knew they were good food and wanted to popularize them among the working class. so he got a 2-acre farm to grow potatoes and placed armed guards around it at all times. People assumed armed guards meant something very valuable was growing there, so they began to steal the potatoes. That's how potatoes became popular in France's working class. He also told his guards to accept bribes and to not actually catch anyone. There are literally entire books of anecdotes of this sort on Ben Franklin. That man was the OG of trolling. He was so good at trolling under the pen name of a female, Silence Doggett. He received several marriage proposals. Only then did he reveal her true identity. Original catfish. Pepsi once had the 6th largest military in the world after the price of Russian vodka couldn't cover their deal for Pepsi products. So they traded 17 submarines, a frigate, a cruiser, and a destroyer for a trade deal. Fun fact, the president of PepsiCo at the time told the National Security Advisor, "We are disarming the USSR faster than you are." Former US President Andrew Jackson was approached by a man who pulled a gun on him. Smaller history fact: this was the first assassination attempt on a US president. The man pulled the trigger and the cap went off, but the gunpowder failed to light. The man pulled a second gun and fired, but the gunpowder again failed to light. The assassin tried to get away, but not before Andrew Jackson got him and beat the shit out of him with a cane. Karl Marx's great-great-grandson has a YouTube video of him doing parkour, called Marx. Hitler, Stalin, Trotsky, Freud, and Tito were all living in the same area of Vienna in 1913. Pythagoras drowned a student to death because the student proved the existence of irrational numbers which contradicted Pythagoras and his cult's, the Brotherhood, beliefs. Well, duck his stupid theorem then. The first known political cartoon is Egyptian, and Joe's hat-ship suit, the only woman pharaoh, pegging her lover and chief architect Senmut. The death of Cato. He killed himself by ripping out his internal organs one by one. When he passed out, the Roman doctors sewed his wound shut, but for just a few seconds. He woke back up and tore the organs out again. Henry Cavendish, the man who was vital in the discovery of gases and discovered hydrogen. He inherited a ton of money from his uncle and built a special castle, I think. He was incredibly introverted, so it was designed so that he never had to meet or see any of his servants. He communicated with them through notes only. He did, however, appreciate other scientists coming to visit and talk. His works mostly came after his death, of course, but I found this guy interesting. The entire country of Malta was awarded the George Cross for its efforts in World War II. It's still on their flag. Emperor Caligula of Rome declared war on Neptune. He had his troops randomly throw spears into the sea and collect seashells as war trophies. Once FDR died, Truman didn't know about the Manhattan Project, but when he found out, he subtly tried to tell Stalin they were working on something big. Stalin was like, "Yeah dude, I knew before you did," since he had so many spies in America. In 1895, the entire state of Ohio had only 2 cars. Both cars managed to still smash into each other. 1927 Liberian elections were referred to as the most rigged ever by Francis Johnson Morris, a modern head of the country's National Elections Commission, and also made it into the Guinness Book of Records as the most fraudulent election ever reported in history, as despite there being fewer than 15,000 registered voters, King received around 243,000 votes, compared to 9,000 for Faulkner. 101 years ago, a massive tank of molasses burst open in Boston, causing a sticky wave that killed 21 people and injured well over 100. The Great Molasses Flood spread at about 35 miles per hour. In 1714, a Norwegian captain and an English captain had a 14-hour-long ship fight. Afterwards, both ships were badly damaged and the Norwegian captain was running out of ammo. He sent an envoy to the English ship, asking if he could borrow some of their ammo. They said no. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.